Oh, someone clicked it already.
Welcome to the W3C WEBRTC Working Group meeting. It's November 19th. A little bit about the W3C Working Group IPR policy. We abide by the patent policy that's on the link below, and only people and companies listed on the link are allowed to make substantive contributions. So this is the November meeting, and we're going to cover a grab bag of things: WEBRTC, WEBRTC extensions, media capture transform, and media capture extensions. The slides are up on the wiki. Do we have a scribe?
I'll take care of it.
Okay, thank you, Dom. The meeting is being recorded, as we noted, and it will be public. Meeting operates under W3C Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. We're all passionate, but let's try to keep it cordial, professional. And I think we all know how to use Google Meet, but you raise your hand to get into the speaker queue, you lower hand to get out of it. Please turn on your mic and don't jump the speaker queue. Just because something's in the repo doesn't mean it's been adopted. That requires a call for adoption, and we try to be clear within the documents what is working group consensus and what is not. Okay, so here is the agenda for today. We're going to have a little bit of discussion of the timing model, mostly in media capture transform, but maybe a little bit in HTML video element. And then we have a series of issues that Yanivar will talk about in WEBRTC PC and media capture extensions. And then Henrik will go over a bunch of issues in, I think, also WEBRTC PC and WEBRTC extensions. So that's the agenda for today. Any bashing of the agenda or other things? Okay, so hopefully we'll have plenty of time, but if we get close, please give us a warning. All right, so this is the first item, which is the timing model. This is going to be a continuation of the discussion we had at TPAC. Much of it relates to media capture transform, but there's some that'll bleed over into HTML video element. The first issue is issue 80. We did go over this at TPAC, but there was a little bit of, I didn't quite get the consensus on the last item. Basically, this was filed by Chris Cunningham, who is the former editor of Web Codex. And he asked a question about the operation of media capture transform if you were to, for example, feed into the stream objects with the same timestamp. And what would happen when they came out on the media stream track. The spec currently doesn't say anything about it, but we had a discussion at TPAC about whether video track generator uses or modifies timestamp. I think the consensus was that it didn't. I don't know if anybody has an opinion to the contrary, but the question was, would it pass video frames with duplicate timestamp values onto the media stream track? And I believe at TPAC our consensus was that it would do so. So video track generator isn't checking for duplicate timestamps or anything like that. I just wanted to check with the group. Is there anyone who disagrees with that conclusion? Okay, so then the next question was, if you had these duplicated timestamps, would they all render? And I don't recall what the TPAC consensus was. I think the answer is yes. But you know, the question is, The rendering is not occurring in Media Capture Transform, right? It's occurring in HTML video element. So I was thinking about writing a PR for this, and then I had to pause and think, like, where would this PR go? Would it be Yanivar?
Well, I think what we probably want to do is write some tests to see how browsers are performing today, and hopefully, unless there's any anomalies, just prescribe that.
I guess the question is, where would we prescribe it? Because it's not actually, it wouldn't, if we're saying that Media Capture Transform is just passing this up through, right? We would have a little bit for the first part to just say that in there, but then are we actually, are we talking about a PR to HTML video element?
That would seem to, my feeling would be that it belongs in the video element. What do video elements do when they get get framed with the same timestamp?
Right, that was kind of my thinking too, Harold, that it would really belong there, not in Media Capture Transform. I guess there's other people in the queue. Yeah.
I apologize for not using the queue.
That's okay. Was UN? I think you were in the queue.
Yeah. So I think that each sync is supposed to define how it's handling the video frames. For instance, in Safari, we'll use the time the video frame is actually committed to the sync as the actual timestamp used for their connection. And the capture timestamp might be the actual video frame timestamp. So you might have duplicated timestamp for the capture RTP extension, for instance. So we would need each sync to actually say what it does with the timestamp of the video frame. I would believe that WEBRTC would define what it does with video frames when sending them. Would believe either HTML video element would also define it. We can define it in Media Capture main, maybe, because there's some places where we are talking about sources and syncs. So we could also define it there if that's easier. But it should be at each sync's place, basically, in Fiori.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point, UN, because this track, right, could actually go into peer connection. And that would be pretty weird if it had all these duplicated timestamps and other strange stuff.
Yeah, we need to test it, as Yanivar said. But I would believe that implementations will use the time that the video frame is submitted. That's probably what implementations are doing.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Okay, I think Guido, you were on the queue.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I was going to say practically the same thing UN said. So in Media Capture Transfer, we can just say that the frames need to be delivered to the syncs that are connected to the track, and then each sync needs to decide how they handle them. And yes, and for video element, maybe we could do it in Media Capture main, as you are suggesting, because we already have some parts of the spec that say how video elements work,
right?
When playing media stream tracks. So maybe it could be there, maybe it could be somewhere else. But
Media Capture main might not be a bad place to do it, because I think it also talks about lip sync and some other timing stuff. So that's actually maybe a good. Might be a good idea.
Yeah, but for the other things, it needs to be in the respective spec for the sync. So for WEBRTC PC, needs to be there needs to be something there, and
Media recorder as well.
Yeah, same for media recorder and for media stream track processor.
Okay, thank you. I think that pretty much answers the question.
So Bjorn, I think that what we said for TPAC was to file individual issues to each spec. So we need an action item there.
Yes, Dom, have you got all that down?
Yes, I'll document that at the resolution.
Yannivar,
Yes,
you're, yeah.
Yes, I was just going to agree that media capture main already has a UN pointed out an extension section that describes how other specs what they're supposed to do when defining new sources and things. And we could probably maybe even give some best guidance there. Like it sounds like yeah, if our guidance, for instance, were to be that most things probably don't look at timestamps much, then we could give guidance like that.
Tim, are you?
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of have a slightly remaining thing, which is that it's a bit weird that a transform, if you have a null transform, and the only thing it does is to set the timestamp to 0, then it completely changes the behavior, or should it completely change behavior or not? Like, I'm slightly perturbed that we're just like documenting a slightly odd set of behaviors, particularly for transform. I feel like transform should like do something. Right. So my problem here is like, imagine you got in a track which actually had every frame as at timestamp 0, and you fed it straight into a video frame. Then some a video element. What would happen would be different than if you fed it through a media transform and didn't do anything with it. Is that right? Because the timestamp behavior is different, is defined differently in different places, and that starts to bother me. Like, because you then can't do a null transform.
Well, since I think I'm on the queue, a null transform will do nothing. A transform that sets the timestamp to 0 is not a null transform.
No, but a null transform, what we're saying is that we're defining the behavior differently in different places. So you could have an identity transform that just because it had gone through video transform, it would render differently than if it hadn't, even if you didn't touch the frame.
I think the null transform just copies the timestamp from the original frame. Sorry if I cut the queue.
Yes, but if it came in with 0, then we're saying the behavior would be different.
Oh, if it came in with 0 for a transform, it should go out with 0.
Yes, but will it render the same way as if it hadn't been through the transform? I'm not convinced about that, and it sounds like we're documenting a case where it wouldn't.
Well, I still don't see a case where it would. If it doesn't change the metadata, the metadata doesn't change.
So, Tim, more specifically, what we're saying is that rendering behavior is something the sinks defines. And so however the track gets processed ahead of the sync should be completely neutral to the rendering.
I think that is
Okay.
what I'm saying, yeah.
Okay, I just think that by defining the behavior in different places, we run the risk of like making it behave differently depending on whether it's been through an identity transform or not. That's what I'm worried about. But if we cope with that to Don's point that we're defining it kind of at the end, then that's fine.
That's exactly that, yes. Because we are defining at the end, we should basically not have that problem.
And yeah, just to say that things probably behave roughly the same, like peer connection, media recorder, media video renderer. They probably all do not look much at the timestamps, except maybe WEBRTC for some RTP header extensions. So we're
Right.
probably safe with we after some testing, we might be able to define a default behavior for syncs. So that if you're touching the timestamps, you will not see any difference in many cases. In most cases.
That's actually kind of what I was hoping the outcome would be, when that we could define a default behavior. I guess I'd have to think more about peer connection though, and the behavior of some things like abs capture timestamp. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the one that would be interesting. And
Yeah.
I don't know what it should do if a timestamp is not monetically increasing, for instance. But that's
Right.
an interesting issue as well.
Yanivar?
So yeah, I think Tim, you talked about transform. I'm assuming you mean a media capture transform, and so in that case, it would be a pair of a media stream track processor and media track generator, and the media stream track processor would be a sync. So we should put so I agree that making null transforms. It sounds like everyone agrees that null transforms should be null transforms. So we should just be careful when we define that, the advice for that sync, to make sure that that works.
Okay, Dom?
Yeah, just making sure I have the right resolution for the minutes, what I have written up. Add to media capture main extensibility, some considerations on defining the behavior of things on frame timestamps, and file issues on sync specs accordingly.
Okay. All right, thank you. And move on to the next one. Okay, so at TPAC, we discussed the behavior of media capture transform, and I believe we came to consensus that it doesn't buffer. But we just had a new issue filed by someone who was upset about the behavior because spec doesn't say anything, so he didn't have any expectation. Basically, he wrote a frame to video track generator, then assigned the container media stream to video.sourceObject and never saw the frame.
Surprise!
Surprise! And then was upset that that operated differently than Canvas. So I just wanted to confirm, based on our TPAC 2024 discussion, that the answer to his issue is that this is the expected behavior. I guess we'll have to do a PR first to put in what the expected behavior is, but that there's actually no issue here. Comments?
Yeah, I think I'm first on the queue here. So yeah, I don't think they should buffer. We don't want to buffer video frames if we do not need to. I'm surprised that capture stream would be different there, especially if we are setting the option that you actually need to call request frame on the media stream track to actually create a video frame. So maybe what he's seeing is that there's a timer that is creating a video frame, and then he sees that the video frame is actually rendered. But it might, we need to check further, and there might be a misunderstanding of how capture stream is actually working. I think it should be consistent.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry.
Yanivar?
Yeah, I'm just catching on. I'm supposed to run the queue. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, my only concern would be that I did write a polyfill for video track generator that was actually using Canvas element. So I guess in theory it would be nice if they worked the same. But at the same time, I also understand that, you know, buffering real time. I don't know. It feels like, but it's not necessarily buffering. There's buffering, there's remembering the last frame or the current frame, right? Those aren't necessarily the same thing.
I don't think it's buffering. It's just emission of the video frame, which is not happening, for instance, like synchronously when you call request frame. It's happening like sometime later. And then since you already attached, you get it. So I really think it's not like buffering at all.
Okay. So it might be desirable then, because it sounded like the use case was that they were assigning video elements in their application. Depending on layout, they were creating new video elements, and they were seeing behaviors where frames were go blank for a little bit, and that was undesirable. So it might be good to ask for a better use case or demonstration of the problem. Henrik?
I was gonna do a similar comment. So in terms of like buffering in the traditional sense, like no, we shouldn't do it. And if he's wiring up the source object to like timing issue, that's an app bug, not a browser bug. But relating to the last frame, I think there is an interesting discussion there. If you have a track generator that has variable frame rate, so think of applying effects on a 0 hertz screen share thing, like you have static content, so you don't want to send more frames. There is the question, if you use the track generator and you send a frame, is delivery guaranteed or not? Because I think in Chrome, there are some edge cases where the frame gets lost, so you kind of have to send another frame. But I think it's a separate issue.
We're going to get to that in another issue, Henrik.
All right,
But-
then I'll be quiet.
But
For this issue,
basically-
I think expected behavior.
Okay.
All right, Harald?
Only comment is that canvas element is really, well, it's a canvas. It exists independently on whether you have generated a frame or not. So it's possible to generate a frame based on the state when you assign the source object. And I think it's all expected behavior. And Janiva, you might want to figure out whether or not you can fix the polyfill to actually behave like that. I don't think polyfills actually are what should guide us into best behaviors.
Okay, so Dom, I
Good
think
point.
the answer for the working group is that it is the expected behavior. Is there anything else we should note in the minutes here? I guess so basically we're going to resolve this as, I guess, expected behavior, not a bug. Any other comments on what we should do with this?
Guido?
I think the only thing we can recommend to this user is that he can buffer the frame in the application,
Right.
and send it to the generator after he associates the track with the video element.
Right.
It should also be noted that the reporter is probably using Chrome, where you can actually enqueue video frames in main thread. But with video track generator being only dedicated worker, you will enqueue video frames asynchronously from main thread. So you no longer have this issue of synchronization purely in main thread.
Good point. Guido?
Well, the user can synchronize, like using message passing between the worker and the window, if they want to make sure that they remember this frame and that they deliver it after the window has confirmed that the association with the video element has occurred. But that can all be done at the application level.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. You transfer the track. You set it to the source object, and then you pass message to say, "Hey, now I'm hooked up." You can start entering video frames. Yeah.
All right. Queue is empty.
Okay. All right. So I think we're done with that one. This is issue 20, which has actually been around for a while, but it goes back to some of the questions that Henrik asked, which is that basically with a video track generator, you could conceivably generate frames at a rate higher than they could be displayed. Like in this particular case, I believe Thomas Wilbert said, hey, you could push 60 seconds worth of data in 1 second, right? And what do you expect to have happen when you do that? And the answer is probably this stuff isn't going to all display because you're pushing it at way more than a real-time rate. So there was a suggestion that there be some kind of note about what you'd expect to happen. And Harold had a suggestion in the issue, which is to say the client of video track generator needs to respect the high watermark of the stream. Otherwise, frames may be lost. So this isn't something with an infinite queue that's going to queue whatever you push into it. And it will process things at a rate no slower than real time, but not much faster either. So, 30, 60, maybe 120 frames a second. That's about it. Can we say anything more than this?
Ewan?
In theory, it's a writable stream. So with writable stream, we could say that when you enqueue, there would be a promise, and you need to await the resolution.
Your
We could
mic
try
dropped
to-
out.
We cannot hear you, Ewan.
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
There we
Okay. So I was just saying that video track generator having a writable stream, we could have like a way to push the information that you need to wait for the enqueuing to succeed to send the new video frame, and we would use promise for that. If we really want to provide the signal to the web application that it cannot send video frames. That's how we would do with writable streams. I don't know if we need to do that or whether it's too late for that, but that's certainly something we could try to do.
Yeah, it is a little weird, Ewan, because, say you're pushing the 60 seconds worth of stuff in there, right? It's you're writing to the writable stream, but it's, I want to be clear what we're saying exactly. We're not saying these frames are getting lost in video track generator, right? Are we saying that they're just not getting displayed by the sync?
I think we're saying that the generator will throw away the
Generator
frame.
will throw them away. Okay, they're getting thrown away there. Okay.
Well,
After I wrote the suggested text, I realized that I think I remember that UN rewrote the text on buffering so that video track generator doesn't actually buffer.
Yeah.
So
Either processes or throws it or drops the frame.
as the queue manager, I'm going to ask people to get on the queue. Is that good? So I think I'm next on queue. Just one concern I have is that I don't know if this matches what you said, Ewan, but I do agree that on a writable stream normally comes with a queue, and there's a high water mark, which means that if it's a pull-based stream, which you can use, it seems to me that if you have a use case of a pre-rendered video, and it should be possible to pipe that into a video track generator and create a track from it. So the question there is, how should the video track generator infer its frame rate from how fast data is coming in? So maybe we could define like the user agent could have a max, like it's not going to generate things at a higher frame rate than 60 or 120, or pick a number. That might be one way to do it, in which case if you write more, that will create back pressure, but it doesn't necessarily mean. And another strategy would be to say video track generator is always real time and it will drop frames. And I don't know if it drops frames today or not.
But so here's a question, Jan-Ivar. How does it know, like, I could be doing a gaming demo or something where I'm typing in 4K at 120 frames a second. If we don't look at timestamps, how do you even know what I'm typing in? You know what I'm saying?
Right, but if it's a pull-based, so there's push-based streams and pull-based streams. If it's pull-based, then the browser will keep asking for more data, and then we haven't really even answered where does the frame rate come from.
Right.
So we need to answer that, I think. But for push-based, we basically can infer the frame rate from the rate at which the producer is pushing data in, and get the frame rate that way. But we could also perhaps put a ceiling and describe what happens above that ceiling. Either things are thrown away, but then which frames are thrown away, the first ones, the last ones, or we could just say that there will be buffering at a certain if you go too high in the frame rate. So we have some options, I think.
Dom, could you note that question? Where does the frame rate come from? Because okay.
I see you on the queue.
Yeah, just to say that there's a write frame algorithm in the spec, and it's returning a promise. And when the promise resolves, that's when the write call that you made from the writable writer will actually resolve. So it gives a way for the web application to know whether there's back pressure or not. And currently, the algorithm is that it's returning a promise that is always resolved, so that you can enqueue. So the write call that you made, the promise of the write call, will resolve at the end of the task in a micro task. So we could use that mechanism to express the signal that there's back pressure, and we could say to specs, hey, you should await. You should call write and await the promise, so that frames are not like discarded when sent to sinks. That's a typical approach to use for streams that we could reuse there. But I think that in general, video track generator is not lossy, and it's sinks that might be lossy, in the sense that if they have too many video frames, then they might discard some of them, and that's okay.
Guido?
Yeah, I want to say something along the lines of the Jen says. So the application can use a prompt as a signal that if it waits for the prompt to resolve, it knows that the next frame will be processed correctly. But if it starts writing frames without waiting for the promise, there's no guarantee that that they will be processed quickly enough by the stream, because we have configured that to do no buffering. So unless we add a parameter to add buffering, I think like the promise mechanism is the way to go. Yeah. So as a guidance for applications.
Thanks, Henrik.
I like the idea that if you use a promise, then the app is guaranteed that you're not overloading the stream, so to speak, and that seems to solve the right. So if you push it, you don't wait for the promise, you just push it faster. It seems like, well, you get yourself to blame. This seems to solve the issue at the stream level, but that's really about pushing too much data. And I think separately to this, there's what Johan said, that syncs can be lossy. Which might be fine, but that means that if I send the frame, even if I do it correctly, I wait the promise and I send the frame, I never know if the last frame I sent will have made it. So it could be if I go from a 30 FPS stream to like static content and I'm like, okay, I sent the last frame. How do I know whether or not the last frame arrived? Like imagine I'm sharing slides and then I change slide, I send the frame for the new slide, and then it's like nothing is changing, so I'm not sending any new frames. How do I know whether the new slide arrived at the destination or not? So if it's lossy, I think we should just add a note. It might be okay, but that might mean that the app needs to repeat frames. Yeah.
Just a comment that video track generator is not a sync, but a source. So I think Ewan was talking about doing it elsewhere. Tom?
Right, but I think Henrik's point was that if it's a source to a lossy sync, one interesting possibility, and I don't know if it's technically feasible, would be for the promise to resolve only if the frame hasn't gotten lost for any reason. So typically, if you're above the frame rate of what can be rendered in the particular sync, well, then you get back pressure by not resolving the promise when you couldn't process it in time, basically.
Okay, Ewan?
Yeah, about lossiness. So peer connection, for instance, you would get full stats the fact that a video frame is received, but has not been decoded, not been encoded. It had been dropped somehow. So we could do that. For media recorder, there's no way. For media renderer, I don't know whether it's. I don't know there. There's no way to ensure that the last video frame would be rendered. But in general, what would happen, I think, is that if your submitted too many video frames, maybe the renderer will not be able to will not be able to render all the video frames, but the last one will probably win. That's my expectation. But it's really a sync strategy there. And it's already the case. It can
I
happen.
think we
So
should specify either that the last frame must arrive or that it's lossy, and you can never know. Like either is fine as long as we have a note that says
generator is not lossy at least if you respect the back pressure. I think that's
Right.
what we should do. But each sync might be lossy anyway, because maybe some things might not be able to support 60 FPS, and peer connection will drop and will be lossy somehow. And for renderer, I believe that we should say the last video frame should win.
All right, so I don't see anyone else on the queue, but it sounds like you weren't suggesting that lossiness should happen in sinks, not in sources. Video track generator is the source. Any objections? Or Guido?
No objections. Fully agree with Joanne, and I think that's what the spec says, or at least that was the intent.
So that
no objection. I suggested adding a note.
if a source is not allowed to, if the transform that is a source is not allowed to use frames, it has to have a queue.
Right.
So I think by order of having a writable, the writable itself comes with a queue, but even if the underlying source does not have one.
Yep.
But we also need to figure out where the frame rate comes from in a full-based stream. If you just pipe, if you have a source of infinite data and you pipe it to a writable video track generator, what frame rate do you get? And once we answer that, we might know more.
I think the answer might be different, Jan Ivar, depending on whether it's, recorded versus real-time data.
Well, in my example, it would be pre-recorded data, infinite amount of data.
Right,
That's
right.
not live. To
Right.
test the limit.
Right. And traditionally, right, the timestamp for that is media time. So it's a little bit different than the real-time case. Anyway.
Right, but I'm assuming that the issue here of 60 seconds worth of data in 1 second is pre-recorded, right?
Yeah, I'm assuming that, yeah. Okay, thank you. And the last one, which we have scant time for, is about playback and sync. So we got partially through this at TPAC, but basically the problem is, again, where sync happens, and lip sync in particular, right? And what is in, this is a quotation from media capture and streams, which I think may be a bit confused. So it talks about lip sync in media streams and HTML video element. And so I guess my question here is really about how the lip sync operation is carried out. And I think that really what it's talking about is a sync of media streams that are captured locally. So that is something where they're in the same clock, which is the local clock, and that's something that HTML video element can do. Whereas peer connection obviously does sync with RTP, but that's not HTML video elements. That's occurring in peer connection, where it's essentially bringing the remote clock into the local clock and doing the play out times and all that stuff. So that's really not something that sync is not going on in HTML video element. So I think what the note here in media capture and streams is talks about synchronization of tracks in general, and that's not really what's going on. Just on that general point, does that make sense to people? That HTML video element is not the thing that's doing lip sync for remote tracks. That makes sense?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
So, I mean, does the video element do lip sync for other purposes?
Well, if I were to just say no peer connection here, I'm just taking, get user media and pumping it into HTML video element, right? That's everything's in the local clock, and I would expect lip sync to occur there. It's not using any of the RTP adjustment mechanisms or anything, right? It's just taking local capture and displaying it. So there, it's basically using everything's in the local clock, and it's syncing the audio and video. But it's different when you have peer connection, because now peer connection is actually doing the translation from the remote clock to the local clock. And I guess what I'm saying is that HTML, in either case, HTML video element is not doing what we call lip sync, at least in RTP concept, right? It's not adjusting clocks or anything like that. It's just taking what's, just displaying stuff from the local clock. Does that make sense, Harold?
I think so. I looked through the bug, and I found that the person writing in the bug seemed to have a particular picture of how the video element works, which included things like playback points, which I don't know what means.
Yeah, I think the notion of a playout point makes sense in peer connection, but not in HTML video element, because I don't think HTML video element is adjusting playout points. Does that make sense?
If it doesn't, then okay.
Okay, so I'm on the queue. So I don't know the answer either, and I'm guessing that maybe if we can run some tests, we could probably try to discern whether sync is affected by any modifications to timestamps. I'm guessing it's not, which might leave us to conclude that browsers are, as you say, probably optimizing the case of local playback and synchronizing that somehow, off the books, if you will, or magically. And the same thing for peer connection tracks. Usually you're playing back audio and video from a peer connection track, so they're going to be synced with each other. But it's a good question how it actually works. I don't know. That's so far I know.
I think that peer connection is basically sending the audio to the track and sending the video to the track synchronized. And then it's, since you're real-time based, you're supposed to render both the audio and the video without delay. So you receive the audio and video synchronized, and you're supposed to render them as soon as possible, so they will stay very close. And that's how it's working. And I guess it's the same mechanism for local capture. So that's why you're seeing that it's synchronized. It's not really synchronized in the sense of, hey, there's a timestamp there, I know the clock, and I will adjust the two. It's just that it's capture is happening in real time and rendering is happening in real time, and there might be small fluctuation, but it's working fine enough.
Yeah, actually, that's the question, Yuan, I guess. So you're saying you don't think that the timestamp actually plays any role in either in the local playout at all?
Yeah, we can check that, but that's my gut feeling. Yeah.
Henrik?
I thought at least in Chrome there was this concept of presentation timestamp, and the video tag was using that, but I don't know. Guido might know better, but it could be that the implementations differ here.
that seems testable, right? You could pass in, you can modify the presentation timestamps and see if it affects playback.
Okay.
It's empty.
Okay, I think we've covered all these all the issues and can probably move on to the next section.
All right, so, and I think we had some last minute changes to the agenda here. So I don't know if the time window is still,
Sorry about that.
let me see.
Yeah, I adjusted the time window for what
Okay.
we had. So, and the amount of slides. So we've got basically half an hour for this section, and then Henrik's grab bag is another half hour. I
Okay.
moved Henrik's
All right,
slides on level ID to his grab bag section.
Got it. Okay, then I'll push on and see how far we get on my section here. Let me see what slide we're on. Yes, so here's my grab bag, and we'll start from the top and see how far we get. So the first one is in WEBRTC extensions. It's an old issue. Sorry, it's an old feature that Mozilla opened a new issue on. We were basically trying to be diligent and go through our standards positions repo. There were issues identified that hadn't been resolved in a long time. So this is one of them. The current API here is we have static methods on sender and receiver to disable hardware encoding and decoding respectively. And I don't know if, at least from looking at the, I don't think that's been implemented anywhere. And I don't think the spec says this yet, but I think there's some discussion that these would work only once per page load in an effort to limit fingerprinting. So that basically you could disable this on the page, but you couldn't re-enable it without reloading the page. So a couple of years have passed, and I think Mozilla has changed. Mozilla was originally negative on this out of concerns with fingerprinting. I think what's happened since is that web codecs is more mature now, and we think it makes sense to align with the exposure that web codecs has, which means there's a hardware acceleration field in web codecs. And so the proposal quickly, Yuan, do you want to comment now or at the end?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So the proposal is to, instead of static methods, have attributes on each sender and receiver. There's basically a hardware acceleration member that is identical to the one in web codecs. It's a declarative API matching the same API you'd see in video encoder and decoder config. And this would let user agents that so wish apply the same fingerprinting mitigation heuristics here and in web codecs, which might include, for instance, not honoring combinations of different values on the same top-level context, which would give the same protections as the aforementioned one-way top-level page load gating in the existing API would give you. So non-static here would match web codecs, and it potentially allow for more informed user agent decisions. For instance, they could make look at the codecs negotiated for a particular sender or receiver to determine the question. Does that make sense to everybody? Yuan?
I would question that. I think that it's okay to try exposing web codecs as the encoder or decoder in peer connection, and then you can use whatever web codecs is offering. Like if you prefer software, hardware, whatever, that's fine. But here, I'm not sure it's actually worth just exposing that. We have proposals to expose somehow web codecs as the encoders for peer connection. So that's where I would try to consolidate things. Apparently, no work was done in that area. Nobody implemented it, so the use cases might be small. And in general, I'm not sure how the implementation will be able to understand whether going to software or hardware is a good idea for peer connection, because they do not know how much there will be resolution adaptation, frame rate drops, how much impacting the latency to encode or decode will impact the flow of peer connection, which is fully opaque. So it's much more difficult to make that decision in peer connection than in web codecs, where all the encoding or decoding is purely done in JavaScript there. You're controlling everything. You're controlling what you get, at what time you get it. You're controlling when you receive the decoded frames and so on. So there you might be able to make a more informed choice. So that's why I would tend that on just allowing web codecs to be used in peer connection.
So you're saying a more informed choice for the user agent or the user? Or the
for the web developer. So the web developer is able to, with web codecs, you know when you receive data, and you know when you will finish processing it with web codecs and so on. You know the size, you know everything. So you can decide whether to go to software or hardware and change. With peer connection, somehow all of this is opaque. You don't know when you receive data. You don't know when you receive video frames, whether the video frames will be dropped before submitted to the encoder, whether there will be a resolution downsizing because there's some limitation in CPU, or whether there's limitation in bandwidth and so on. So you know almost nothing, contrary to
You know
implementation
all of
by
this from
using web
GetStats.
codecs.
You know
Well,
all of these things from GetStats.
it's no, you're not knowing all of this, and it's not in real time as well. So that's why I think that we should just try to open the box, and I do not see that as compelling enough just for this.
So it's a criticism of the existing API as well, or with a change in API?
No, I mean, I understand that people might want to use web codecs, and that will fix this issue. And I would prefer we spend time on that instead of trying to say, oh, web developer, now you can try to toggle on software or hardware, and you might be able to understand what's happening. You might not be able. It's way more complex to do that in peer connection context than in web codecs typical context.
Sorry, I'm going to move on, but I just want to make sure if you're preferring the old API or not.
I'm not in favor of any of them.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Bernard? Bernard?
Yeah, so a little bit of context here. I agree with you, Wen, that if you really want to control this, you should probably go the web codecs route. But I think this use case was a little bit different from that. It was really in response to some bad bugs that got into stable versions of the browsers, like acceleration bugs. So the goal of it and reason it was static was just to turn off hardware acceleration in general, not for particular receivers or senders. It was just kind of a blunt hammer where you just would just turn it off to avoid some horrible bug. And so it's not really trying to give developer control, or because that would be the kind of web codecs route that UN referred to. So I think this is kind of in the middle, and it doesn't give the developer the control you want, and it's more than people would be willing to do just to kill this kind of a bug scenario. So I'm more in favor of the existing one, but than this one.
All right, thanks. Henrik?
I think the old API is worse, and the new API being proposed is a good idea. And I think the one use case is you detect the corruption detection with the recently added metrics on the remote endpoint, and you send a message to this client, and it will do a fallback. You can't do that without this API. You need to know this during the session. You can't do it upfront. The old API was you have to know it upfront. So I think this is a good idea.
Arnold?
So my memory is it's like Bernard's. I remember that this was proposed, I think, by FIPO to handle a case where, by some means, like it failed the previous time, we know that on this platform for this user, we really don't want to wake up the beast in his hardware encoder. And the new API proposal is more flexible, and the preferred software might be a little bit soft for the original purpose. I mean, the original purpose was not prefer software, but might take hardware if you really insist. It was don't turn on that encoder. So
Right.
so I don't know how many values web codecs has available for this.
Oh, there are three. There's
But it looks prettier.
There's no preference, prefer software, and prefer hardware. And I should mention there's a second slide here. If we could go to the next slide. The idea was to provide parity here with the existing API and the existing use case of just turn off this off, please. But the good thing of referencing hardware acceleration, I think, was that it satisfied some of the Mozilla concerns. Like, what if we have a bug in Firefox and we fix it? And now we have a lot of websites that detect Firefox and turn off this hardware encoder. How can we turn it back on now that we've fixed it? So we get this long note about all the cases where a user agent can ignore prefer hardware or software that's already been reasoned out for us in web codecs. So that was a bit of a driver to get that in here somehow. But it doesn't sound like we have much of in the way of consensus one way or the other here. So I'm not sure what next steps are.
So we have two. Sorry. So I think we have two proposals. One is to delete according to UN, delete the old API, and the other proposal is to replace the old API with a new API, and that is called at least defined the same as something that someone else is doing. I mean, having someone else do the hard work of definition for it, it's kind of nice.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think with encoded source and other things we're doing, the conversion that Harold proposed, we're kind of heading towards the web codecs control one anyway. So if you want the granular scenario, you're probably going to be able to get it. So I just question, anything in between the blunt hammer and the granular one.
Yeah, sorry, I realized I was supposed to hand over queue management to Guido. Guido, does that work for you?
Absolutely. Since you were managing it, I was just
I
letting you
forgot.
go, but
My bad.
Okay, go Yuan.
Yeah, I would echo what Bernard is saying. There's an encoded source proposal that is fixing it on the encoding side, and you would have full control there. So then this API is not really useful. And we don't have that on decoding side. We sort of have that on decoding side, where you can, through encoded transform, get the raw data and decode it yourself, which is not super great. But at some point, we might want to be able to plug in web codecs with the jitter buffer and so on as well. So I would push towards that instead of going there.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to ask about the workaround to corruption, but maybe we're spending too much time here. That would be the main use case I would think of for this.
Oh, the total corruption metric?
Yes.
I would think, Henrik, that the typical approach for you detect that there's corruption, and then you download your WASM-based decoder software and you plug it through web codecs, for instance, and you're sure that you're good there. Like there's no corruption related to decoders, and that's what the solution, the end solution to me is. This prefer software, prefer hardware preference is achieving like half of the journey, and I think like we should go full speed with web codecs if we really want to solve your issue there.
So I think, so I'm not hearing a lot of consensus for the new proposal. So that would mean that Mozilla position would probably return to negative for the existing API. But I would like to move on to next issue then. All right. So next issue is WEBRTC PC. And this is a question to reconsider replace track, which currently blocks on the operations queue or operations chain. Replace track step 6 says return the result of chaining the following steps to connections operations chain. There seems to be an uneven implementation where Firefox and Safari are doing this, but Chrome appears to instead do the operation right away, which causes a slight timing difference that could, in theory, cause some interrupt problems. We haven't been able to observe it particularly, but it is testable. Like I wrote a test that queues a lot of set local description and then rollback, set local, and then the for loop. You can do that 100 times, and then you can actually, a bit of an exploit if you have access to negotiation, you can delay the replace track in Firefox and Safari, but not Chrome. But why was it like that? And I looked back on this, and the original reason seems to no longer hold. It seems the original reason was that we thought it was important to update sender track in time for create offer or create answer. Because in the old days, the track IDs ended up in A equals MSID, and since we switched to the track model, those are no longer reliable because of a replace track. And in fact, in Firefox, if you look at the SDP, the track ID and MSID is always random, and it does not reflect the sender track. Stream IDs, on the other hand, are reliable, but aren't affected by replace track. And I also did a test that no browser today seems to populate A equals MSID from replace track. You will get a random ID even in the other browsers in that case. So since replace track is supposed to work independently of negotiation, blocking on it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And this came up in recent discussions around source switching and screen capture that seem to underscore the importance of replace track null working quickly, if not synchronously. And the negotiation can delay replace track, basically. So the proposal is to drop line 6 and do the remaining steps immediately, which I think matches what Chrome is doing. Thoughts?
So after having thought about this for a while, I'm always skeptical of changing things without remembering why we did it in the first place. But after thinking about it, I support the idea of saying that changing the spec instead of changing Chrome.
Great.
Good.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Probably there's no big difference, but still, going a little bit faster is good, and hopefully there's no compat issue. So seems good.
Great. That was quick. I'm hearing agreement to change the spec on this one. So thank you. That's fine. Yes. Awesome. Next issue. So this one is hopefully more of a cleanup task, I hope. We need to clarify the order of events when the HTTP transport is closed. And a use case here, which isn't really well documented in the spec, is that it seems to work in all browsers that you can detect that the remote peer is closing, including closing a browser tab, if you listen to the closed event on a dedicated data channel. There's a bug with Firefox you have to be aware of there to avoid garbage collection. But other than that, it seems to work in all browsers. RFC 8831 seems to support this by saying if an HTTP association is closed in a graceful way, all its data channels are closed. In the case of non-graceful teardown, all data channels are also closed, which seems to be that graceful here is more about making sure all your messages got sent. It doesn't really impact whether close events are fired. So that suggests that receiving shutdown or HTTP abort needs to fire closed events on all data channels, which the spec isn't very clear about. What it does do is it fires the closed event on the HTTP transport object, But that seems like a retrofit, and we have normative statements in the table here, which makes finding them a little difficult, but they are here. So a task is queued to update its HTTP transport state to closed when a shutdown or abort chunk is received, when the association has been closed intentionally, such as by closing the peer connection or applying a remote description that rejects data, or changes the HTTP port, and the underlying DTLS association has been transitioned to closed. Next slide. So, but how does data channel get its closed event? Oops, is that the next slide? Let's see. Oh, thank you. So this is probably the algorithm that we need to call once per data channel. Of course, in theory, you could have up to 65,535 data channels open, or maybe half of that if they're depending on direction. So we need to figure out: do we queue at 65,000 tasks, and do we do that before or after the previous slide closed event on the HTTP transport? And that's a TBD to check what browsers do today. I figured we could have the discussion about what would be reasonable here, perhaps. Or we could also just decide to align with whatever implementations do. Yuan? Oh, sorry.
So I think we should enqueue a task per event. That's the usual way. So that's something. In terms of orders of the data channels, I don't know if we have an API where we have the order. We used to have a get data channel proposal. So we might want to use the order there. I guess it kind of makes sense, but I don't know where the proposal here is. And related to whether the closed transport should fire or the data channel, I don't really know. Like my intuition would give me that we should fire on the HTTP transport first because it's the first one. But that's it. I don't have any more concrete reason why it should go first and not last.
All right, thank you. I see that we do have an internal slot for data channels at least, so we could use the order that is there. I don't know what happens with workers because it can be transferred there.
Tim?
Yeah, I'm trying to look to see whether you can close an individual data channel. Like, do you ever get a close event on a data channel that isn't closing the whole association?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a close method that causes a close indication on the other end.
Okay, and in that case, then you want the event that fires to say that this was closed to be different depending on whether it was closed en masse by the association going away than you do if that individual channel is closed. So the handler would need to tell you what the cause was.
Yeah, I think the event actually has a cause in it, or an optional error. So I have to check.
It's an HTTP detail field, I think.
Yeah.
HTTP reason, something like that.
I mean, I could live with the idea that you own, if the whole association goes away, then it closes the association, and you only get the data channel closed when an individual channel is closed because the foreign closed it. But that's maybe not what other people would expect. But wrong button. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. So you could already, if we go back a slide, you could already listen to the closed event on the HTTP transport. So if we fire that event first, that might be a good reason to fire it first. That way you could know to expect all your data channels to close next, and you would know that that's why they closed.
Good.
Just to,
Yes, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to finish that thought, one of the things you would do in a individual close handlers, maybe try to reopen it, which is the last thing you want to do if the whole association's gone away.
That's a good reason for firing the transport lab and firing the SFTP transport close first.
Yeah, we too. Tim, you seem to suggest that maybe we do not need the close event on data channel. I think it's still useful, especially when the data channel is in a worker. Of course, you can shim it by post messaging, but still, it's I think it's useful to be able for the data channel on its own to know that it's not now closed.
Yeah. Now, if it closes with an error, you get an error event and then a close event. Just to multiply the number of events by a factor of 2 again. 625.
Okay, I'm not hearing any objection to specifying that. So I think we're over time though. I mean, Henrik, how many slides do you have? Do we want to go through this one first?
3 issues, but I don't know how many slides. But is this a quick one? Or do you think it's long?
Sorry, Yaniva, what was the conclusion then on the previous issue?
I didn't hear any objections to specifying. It sounded like we prefer to have the state on the SHP closed fires first on the transport object, and then it fires separate tasks for each data channel. And ready for PR, I think.
Thanks.
How about this, Janivar? We can go to Henrik, and if he has time over, we can come back to black frames.
That sounds good.
Yeah,
all right.
Sounds good. All right, personal grab bag. First one is about adding an event. So on the receiver, you have get contributing sources and get synchronization sources, which update on each RTP packet, including SSRC and timestamp information and audio level for audio. So I think most user agents either use a mutex or do a block invoke, because the specs literally says post the task on every packet, which probably isn't the most efficient thing to do. But the important thing to note here is that we have a getter, and it's for the app, it's timing sensitive to know the result of the getter. So because the CSRC information and audio level is used to render the page. So for example, if you do use virtual audio SSRC or virtual video SSRC, you need to know, like, each receiver over time will represent different participants. So you need to know on which tile should I display the audio level, on which tile should which participant name belong to. So because you need to know this quickly, the end result is, in order to avoid delays or displaying things in the wrong place, apps need to pull this at high frequency, which works, by the way, like that works. But the next slide, this seems neither ergonomic or performant. The only reason to pull in a loop, you could have 50 or 100 receivers, is to get this information as soon as possible. So why not just fire an event when the source value changes? Here's the proposal. Bernard?
Well, we had a long discussion when this first came around, and the original use case was just fairly, it wasn't extensive polling, and I don't think at that time we envisaged the size of conferences that we have today. And there was a lot of concern about the polling and all of the problems that could result in. But it was, yeah, it was just to show kind of it was more, I think the original discussion was more about the audio than the video. Just to kind of show who was the dominant speaker, who was speaking at the time, something like that, with a little icon, showing that sound was emitting from a particular participant. So anyway, there was concern also about the volume of events that could be fired from this as well.
Well, so the event would only fire when the source changes. So that would not be a lot. Jennifer?
Yeah, so my main concern, which I mentioned in the issue as well, is that the poster hasn't replied yet whether the main use case was to signal whether media is flowing or not. And Firefox already fires the unmute event for this. And there's a Chrome bug to align with that I worry. So I'm reluctant to introduce an new API that works around that functionality.
I asked
fixed.
them. I believe they answered on the issue, but I asked on chat as well, and they're interested in because I did mention unmute would solve this, but they are interested in the source information, and that's why they're pulling it. So it's true that this. It's true that if you have this event, that works instead of listening to unmute, but this is a separate use case.
So I'm concerned about introducing a potential API, even if it has other use cases. It might cement a difference in the interoperability that we have today. That would be my objection on that.
Couldn't you express that in a sort of standards position, like only supportive if on unmute is implemented, or something like that?
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to separate this use case from implementation status issue.
That would resolve my concern, yes.
Okay. Yuan?
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand how this would be implemented. So basically, you have these SSRCs, CSRCs that are known where packets are flowing, so in a given thread. And so what would happen is that when you detect that there's a change of SSRCs or CSRCs, basically you would post a task on the peer connection environment with the new values. You would update these values and you would fire the event. Is that the algorithm that you? Okay, so I guess in that case there's probably not that much events, and it gives stability as well to the values. So it seems okay to me.
Yeah. Jennifer?
Yes. So now I'm considering the API. I'm wondering if a CSRC change is well enough understood at a high level. Like, what does it mean that the CSRC changes? What is the use case? What is the meaning? Is there a high level name, or do developers just know?
Well, it's in the cases Bernard is first.
In terms of understanding, we have one method called get synchronization sources, and we have one method that says get contributing sources. So the event just says the exact same thing, but for that or that thing.
Fair enough.
So let's go Bernard first, and
so presumably, to answer Jan-Eva's question, presumably, the audio packets are flowing in with while Henrik is speaking, they're all from Henrik's CSRC, and then Harold speaks and it changes to Harold's, and that's when the event would be fired, presumably. Yeah, and I guess for the video, it would be the same thing. This would be some like composite. Well, it could be a composite video from a compositor or something. Well, actually, see, that's where it gets a little weird, right? If it was composite video, there'd be multiple CSRCs. So what would happen there? Or if the mixer mixed several voices, like how would it work, Henrik?
I without having the answer, I would imagine it does whatever get contributing sources does today, right? Like we have it returns an array with the latest information. I don't think we would like flip flop around here, right?
So the facts we have today are that people have built applications where the application in the browser uses this information, and whatever it connects to provides this information. So we have application level semantics for this, for what it means that they change. So all we're looking at here is having faster or more ergonomic ways to expose that.
Right. You just look at the most fresh RTP timestamp, and you look at that source value, and the app knows what it means because the app is the originator of their server or something. Geneva?
Yeah, just to challenge the use case a little bit again, it seems to me that polling isn't necessarily a bad API for certain applications, like the little bars that are in the corner here of my video telling me that I'm speaking. So
I mean, you
I
would
would like to push back a little bit that this is clearly polyfillable, right? So
you would still poll regardless if you for example, if you were interested in animating a volume bar, but the use case is that you want to know when the participant changes. You want to know this as soon as possible, because any delay there would mean delaying showing the correct participant in the correct tile, which means we're sort of forcing the app to poll this as however frequently it thinks is fine before it goes into performance issues, which again, is neither ergonomic or performance. But yes, you can polyfill this. It's just not ergonomic or performance.
But why are we optimizing for applications that don't have these little nice volume bars?
So for applications that don't.
Well, I mean, if most video conferencing sites already are using this API today, and they don't need this new API because they're already polling, right?
Because they're complaining about the number
Glitches.
of cycles they spend on it.
Yeah, we've got several anecdotes about issues, and they've affected the polling. In Chrome, we did this really hacky optimization where if you pull this in a loop, we're like, oh, you probably want all of them. Like there's like workarounds to this. It's not nice, but works, sure. Bernard?
Yeah, it's kind of a new use case beyond, the original one where, like you said, you want to change the label on the video or whatever more quickly. I just was a little, the original one was really more focused on audio, I think, than on video. But I guess you're saying, Henrik, that there's interest in the video as well?
Yes.
Are there that many video conferences that use CSRC for video? I guess you're saying they do?
I know there's Google products doing this. I don't know
they
if
actually
there's
use
something else.
CSRC in video. I guess that would be like a dominant speaker thing. Okay, thanks.
Jan?
Yeah, just to say again that this change is getting us closer to the typical web model where something is changing somewhere, and then you get a message like an event, and you get the new value, and the value is stable until the next event, and so on. So that's well understood. That's much better than the current mechanism of polling, I think. So it seems good to be more webby there.
Should we do how many are for and how many are against? Grant? Any objections?
So I think my support is tentative.
Tentative support.
So Geneva, can you clarify, is that tentative on the point you made about Meet event, or tentative more generally?
Yes, yeah, it is a concern for me that we risk cementing an interrupt issue by adding a new API that does sort of the same thing. It's an overlapping use case.
The concern is related to muting and unmuting, not this use case. So I think
yes,
we can make that clear in an intent to shape.
There's an existing API to detect when the media is flowing that is not working perfectly in all browsers, and this would an implementation of here might become the new API for that if we're not careful.
We're
The
implementing
media
that
is
actually.
continuously flowing after you start.
I'm wondering whether implementing that will actually help implementers also move to trying the mute event, the unmute event in a better way, because Safari is also not is aligned with Chrome there, and we would like to move to the spec there as well. So I'm just wondering whether implementing that would actually help as well, getting us closer to the unmute event as specified. Henrik, do you know that?
I think it makes perfect sense if we staff someone to implement this, that we also staff them to fix on unmute. It seems kind of related. Like you could probably shim on unmute on top of we have an SSRC.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
like I think it makes sense. I want to be careful to promise something because I don't know what the priority is of this, but I think it makes perfect sense. Like I would support that.
So maybe can we do some normative language, perhaps, that the user agent must implement two features in together or something?
I think we only want to describe the end state, not start spending cycles describing transitions. So I mean, I guess what I'm hearing is that your concerns have been well noted by other implementers. We are also hearing strong signals that this may actually be the opportunity to fix that old bug. And of course, I clearly invite you to be vigilant. But I don't think that the spec is a place where this gets fixed. We are about defining what the end state ought to be, not the intermediary steps to that.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to hear implementers wanting both features. I guess I'm trying to avoid is future spec meetings. A year from now, is well, we have on source change, so maybe we don't need unmute.
I think on unmute makes sense regardless, because not all applications use virtual SSRCs. So, like, it's not like one replaces the other. This not having been implemented like on unmute has more to do with priorities. No one asked for it developer-wise.
Well, that's an open.
I'm sure there's someone who's asked for it, but it hasn't been high up in the agenda. Like, I'm not against. I think it makes sense.
I think a lot of the mute issues in Chrome are. Sorry for jumping the queue, but there was no one in the queue. But to clarify, the Chrome issue is they're derived from the ambiguous language in the media capture main spec about what mute means. That mute could mean no frames imply mute, or mute implies no frames, and yeah, that crept into all the different specs using media string tracks, and that's basically why mute is broken. So we would like to fix that. So we are I presented a few meetings ago something so that we can, like, adding an extra stat in stats and so on, so that it makes it easier for us to move to a better definition of mute that will help us fix everything. So.
Yes, but to clarify, that has been addressed in the spec now. I think the media capture main now it says that its definitions apply to camera and microphone, and other specs are expected to declare. You had the whole cleanup,
Some things have been done there, but I mean, we are still maintaining the compatibility language of no frames imply mute, which is not exactly what we really want. What we want is mute implies no frames delivered to the sinks. But I believe we can.
I think we have a consensus. It's just that it has not been, implementation has not been updated. And implementing that is just a prioritization issue. It's not that we don't like on unmute on remote tracks.
No, that's great. That's because Mozilla thinks unmute is important. We implement it, and it's also the way that it's the official way you're supposed to get stats as well. It's like stats aren't always guaranteed. to be present until you get the unmute event. So just making sure that that use case that becomes the main way to get reliable statistics.
For the sake of time, can we say rough consensus, but note this mute concern and move on to the next slide or this slide? Yeah. All right. So let's talk about level IDs. If everyone's ready, yes. So encoders and decoders, and particularly hardware ones, could have restrictions on the max resolution or max frame rate. And so in the case of H.265, also known as HEVC, there is this level ID equals X line in the SDP-FMTV line. So all of this is background on how things work. And this is a maximum. So if you can do X, you can also do any value below X. But if you call get capabilities and you look at this line, you will not see every possible value between 0 and X listed there. You'll only see the highest value. And that's not a bug, that's a feature, because when you negotiate an SDP, there's only one SDP-FMTP line in the offer and answer. There's only one payload type that we negotiate. And the result of a negotiation is that the max level ID that both endpoints can do, that's what you're gonna do. So if I can send more than you can receive, you will tell me in SDP, and I will not send that. That is basically it. And just FYI, like encoder and decoder ID can be different, not just across endpoints, also locally, which, like, go to the next slide, because we all like concrete examples. So on my MacBook M1 Pro, there's a flag to enable like experimental H.265 support. I see this. So on the sender, I see level ID 186. And on the receiver, I see level ID 180. And that's interesting. You can play around with this and do a loopback call. So here's an example of what can happen. I offer to send 186. I answer to myself that I can only receive 180. And that's okay, because 180 is less than 186. So if you look at sender get parameters codecs, you'll see 180, not 186. I think that's happened. If not, that's what should happen. That's what got negotiated. So that's good, right? Next slide. But so here's the kind of the thing, reaching the issue that I want to discuss. So here's an innocent looking code snippet. You check capabilities, find this codec that you like. You do get parameters. You change the codec to this value and you set parameters. That works, right? Well, it depends. So this will actually behave differently depending on if this is before or after negotiation. So before negotiation, you will just look at what you can send, or if you set preferences, what your preferences are, which means like if you haven't negotiated yet, it will accept the get capabilities values 186. And if you try to put in 180, it's going to say this codec doesn't exist, and it's going to throw an exception. If you do an offer answer, you get the parameters.codecs now has a value. So now it expects 180, which if you set 180, it works. If you set 186, it throws. So you get different throwing depending on, and there's several things in the queue. I'm wondering if I should take that now or after the next slide.
I think the one I have is related to this particular slide.
Okay.
You said before negotiation, 180 throws. Now, because you have no codec. So this is, if you recall, relates to what constitutes the media format, right? Because that constitutes the codec. And I believe the media format for H.265 is profile ID and tier only. So I think that trying to set it to 180 shouldn't throw.
Okay, that's a good point. I believe the spec currently just says if equals, and maybe we just need to clarify that. But my next slide will not be affected. Like even if 180 works here, that's not the main problem I'm concerned with. Like the problem I'm concerned with is the other way around. That after negotiation, you can't set it to 186. And I believe that's. Oh yeah, Jan Emer.
I also had a comment on the last slide. I think it's okay that that code fails, because I think ahead of negotiation, I think that innocent looking code snippet is ahead of negotiation because it assumes that you can get all capabilities the browser supports and try to set one of them. But I think after negotiation, this code would be wrong. It would be better to source it and find the codec in the negotiated codecs.
Yes. So I have a proposal A and a proposal B. You are in proposal B camp. Let's go to the next slide. So proposal A, the foot hug or the foot gun. So proposal A is let's not throw. Instead, you downgrade 186 to 180. And the reason I think this is a good idea is most apps will never need to care, and it's consistent with set codec preferences. So it's like intuitive. If I could set this codec at one point in time, I can set it at another point in time. I get this exact same behavior. I don't need to care. So it's less foot-gunny. But so proposal B argues that no, we should throw. It's actually the app, you're doing it wrong. If this is your code snippet, you're doing it wrong. It's a valid argument because if you're negotiating, you don't know which codecs are supported until after negotiation. But this is also something I'm a little bit concerned about. So the reason why this is a little bit scary, normally we're scared about backwards compat risk. Here I'm kind of concerned about forwards compat risk, or just lack of testing. So the reason why I don't like this throwing is that it only throws if the level ID got downgraded during negotiation, which means that this exception will only be thrown. It's conditional on platform, codec, hardware combinations. Like it could be that in testing this works, and then something changes and suddenly apps break, or it breaks in a different environment than you test. And I looked at the web platform test suite, and I noticed that we used the wrong pattern in one of the web platform tests, and that could be a reason to expect that maybe real developers also make this mistake. In addition to that, some codec or some products, for example, Google Meet, when you join, the server will tell you which codecs are supported. So when you do an offer answer, you actually know upfront, oh yeah, this codec is supported, which could, in addition, lead to mistakes like this. So the problem is, if you're doing it wrong, you might not know. But yeah, that is proposal A and proposal B. What do people think? I'm personally in favor, prefer proposal A, but Jennifer?
I let Bernard go first.
I also prefer proposal A.
Yeah, I think even though you assigned me to B, I think A makes sense as well. I don't see a reason not to, because I think you had made a good argument that this could work in testing and produce unexpected results in production.
Yeah, and oh, I'll stop rambling. Harald? Who is muted?
You're still muted, Harold.
Proposal A. I think we should document this. When set codec preferences, we take the codec that is in the parameters and negotiate it with the current set of available codecs. If we can't negotiate it, then we throw.
Okay.
And the chosen codec should be the result of negotiation.
So we have consensus then.
Yeah.
Yay! Hooray! Okay, next slide. Oh yes, let's revisit. I think we talked about this ages ago. Let's revisit it. So I want to talk about audio codecs and in particular stereo. So today, Opus is the only only codec capable of stereo, meaning it has two audio channels instead of one. It's mono. So for example, if you just call get capabilities, this is what you see, including some weird things. My Google Home thinks I'm talking to it. Sorry. Anyway, there's a Opus stereo, and so the expectation, I think, hopefully we all can agree, is that if I have a local track that is stereo and I'm sending it, then if I'm using a codec which is stereo capable, then I should be sending, and the other endpoint should be receiving stereo. And if it's the codec is mono, this should be mono. Right? Simple. Okay, so problem, how do we test this? How do we actually test this? Next slide. So WebRTC PC, we recently clarified which settings are applicable on which types of tracks. So WebRTC PC specifies which settings are applicable to remote tracks in particular, which is different than what local tracks can do. And we never listed channel count. I don't know if that was just we forgot to add it to the list or if that was on purpose, but we have this interesting matrix here. So in Chrome, channel count is implemented for both local and remote tracks. In Firefox, it's implemented for local tracks, but not remote tracks. And I believe in Safari, it's not implemented on either track. Could be wrong there, but I think that's what happened. Yes, Johnny?
Sorry, I don't have the answer for Safari, but you asked how to test it. You test it by sending using web audio, and you send a square wave on the left channel and a sawtooth wave on the other channel, and then on the remote connection you use web audio to use the channel, use the channel splitter.
You can probably work around this being missing, but I think for symmetry it makes sense to add it, and it's easier to use. So my first proposal is let's add it. I have other slides that kind of assumes channel count exists, but you can, in the subsequent slide, if we don't agree the channel count can be exposed, you can substitute my channel count check with use web audio to detect channel count. But yeah, do we think it makes sense to have get settings.channel count simply for being able to add some web platform tests here easily and to align with what one of the browsers are doing?
Seems okay with me.
Yeah. Bernard or Yen, do you want to chime in? I hear no objection. Okay. They drop out. Anyway, okay, let's have channel count on remote tracks. Next slide. So here's some tests that I think we should add. So if you have a stereo track, I think we should try if you have a mono codec, we can then expect that the remote track has a channel count of 1. And if you use a stereo codec by Opus, we can expect that the channel count is 2. This passes in Chrome. It would pass in Firefox if channel count was exposed, but currently we would fail because it doesn't expose it. And on Safari, I don't know what the status is because I can't detect how many channels are used. Yes, and so on Chrome, the second test, it fails on Chrome, but because today to get stereo you have to do SDP munching. The goal from Chrome is to stop. You should not have to SDP munch. You should get stereo. If you send a stereo track, you should get stereo. Then we should pass. Perfect. So this is aligning with Firefox. Next slide. And so here's the kind of the weird one where I think more discussion is needed. So if you have a mono local track and you send mono, well, no surprise. Obviously, it's going to be a mono remote track on the other endpoint. But here's the other thing. If you have a local track, this is mono, and you send it using Opus, which is negotiated as a stereo codec, the question is, should the channel count say 1 or 2, or is it up to the browser? In terms of encoding, I think it's clear you should do when you send the mono track, you should send it as mono. Otherwise, you're just wasting bits. So no problem there. On the decode side, which is what would dictate the remote track channel count, there's the question: do you reinitialize the decoder on the fly to switch between audio or mono and audio, or do you just always do stereo? The WEBRTC audio folks seems to think that if you change from stereo to mono and back and forth, there could be audio glitches. So they would prefer to just instantiate the decoder as stereo. And that means that if the signal on the wire is mono, there's gonna actually be upmixing happening inside the decoder. And the reason why you might switch between mono and stereo on the fly is virtual audio SRC. The proposal here is that I think it should be okay that you may say channel count to it if the codec is stereo, but it might also be unexpected. So let's go to the queue. Kim?
Yeah, I was hoping to have time to actually look this up, but I'm almost sure that the SDP for Opus is always stereo. I think it's 48/2. I don't think you can do /1. So it's like
I believe the spec says that it's always stereo capable, and the SDP parameter doesn't matter. The SDP parameter is the preference.
Yes, so I don't think, what I'm trying to say is I don't think you'll ever see Opus on the wire as mono. It's an attribute of whether the decoder chooses to decode it as stereo or mono rather than what happens on the wire. It's a long time since I looked at this, but there's weird behavior there.
I would think that the thing on the wire can actually be mono, because I saw the audio folks were talking about using different bit rates depending on if it's mono or stereo, so it has to make a difference. So John Evers first, and then Harald.
Yeah, so the web developer in me kind of feels that if I always get a stereo signal, it's actually quite hard to detect that the source is mono. So that would make me feel that having a channel count, if we're going to have a channel count, and given that it's otherwise redundant, because you could find this out with web audio anyway, it would actually be useful if it returned 1, I think, if the source was mono. It's a bit, I guess it's not a strong opinion, but it seems like, I don't know if that's what Chrome does today or not. Also, my other question was, since we just decided to have channel count, have you thought about whether the on configuration change event would fire, which is in media capture extensions, if we were to change from mono to stereo?
I have not thought about that.
Okay.
No, but with regards to channel count or web audio, I think like the problem exists either way. Like if we expose channel count, even if we don't expose channel count, you would see that you get 2 channels from a single.
Yes, but it might be hard to detect that those 2 waveforms are identical. And if the upstream source is mono, you get 2 channels. But it'd be good to know whether you can actually just drop one and not lose any information. And then it would also be nice if we got a configuration change event, if that ever switched to actual stereo or down switch between stereo and mono on the source end. If that's possible. I don't know if that's even easily to detect on the receiver side.
I don't know the answer to that. Should we go to Harald?
I chatted a little with Jean-Marc at the ITF about mono and stereo. And what they said was that, yes, when you know that the signal is mono, you can encode it and decode it with less use of CPU power, which is good. As to testing, I think you should consider actually doing a signals test, as in use web audio to generate a track with 2 channels, and where there's noise in one and not and silence on the other. And then decode it on the receive side and see that you actually get 2 channels with different signal levels in them. I don't think that's hard to write if you know if we know can do the web audio APIs properly. But I think we have to expose channel count in the track settings. Otherwise, it's meaningless.
I would like us to expose channel count regardless, because I think it's convenient to test. Like, is Opus stereo supported? It's easy to test that way, and it's Chrome side already implemented.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the channel count 1, even though you negotiated stereo codec, it's a bit of an edge case. But I would like the channel count regardless, because you can test which browser supports stereo or not. That seems like a good thing to do, regardless. But Johnny, raise your precision to only expose it if we also on the fly change channel count so that mono is mono and stereo is stereo, or is it okay to only change it when the codec changes?
I think it's fine to add either way.
Okay. So no strong objection to 1, add it, the channel count, and 2, have a may expose channel count 2 for stereo.
Well, the may isn't great, I guess. I'd rather we decide to have something that's interoperable.
Can we do must? I mean, I suspect that because both Chrome and Firefox use WEBRTC here, I would expect we do the same thing, which is always stereo. But I haven't been able to confirm that because I don't have channel count in Firefox. But I would suspect that we do the same thing.
Well, why don't we figure out what WEBRTC does, and then we could try to standardize that.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So yeah, okay. So consensus on channel count, and then sort of tentative consensus, but let's sanity check what we do on the second part.
I guess I'll reserve the right to propose.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if I don't like WEBRTC, then I can always file an issue and try to change.
Yeah.
We still take contributions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have 4 minutes left, which I think is probably not enough time to go back to you, Janivar.
No, I think we could save those slides for next time.
Okay. Do we have any next steps or additional notes that we should put down before we finish up? I guess hopefully we have all the action items in the minutes, so we don't need to.
They seem clear enough, I hope.
Okay. All right, so I think we're done for the day. Thank you, everybody.
See ya.
See you later.